In this lesson, we're going to go over some time-saving techniques that you will find very useful once you start writing piles and piles of code. In a previous lesson, I had mentioned when adding another number to a variable that the syntax can be simplified. And this is where I show you that simplification. First, let's go over compound assignment operators. It's a fancy name for a simple syntax. So let's say we had two numbers. We had an int, my number equals 5, we'll start off. And the other number we'll just do a literal here. Let's say we want to add another 5 to my number. We could do my number equals my number plus 5. Alright, so what we're saying here is I have a variable that's an integer called my number set to 5 initially in the initializer, and then I am adding 5 to it. My number equals my number plus 5. There is a simpler way to write this, and that is using something called a compound assignment operator. Instead of writing my number equals my number plus 5, I will comment this out, we can simply write my number plus equals 5. Does the same exact thing. And look at that wonderful simple syntax. We could do the same thing for subtraction. Let's say we wanted to subtract 5. We could do my number equals my number minus 5, or we could simply type my number minus equals 5. That is plus and that is minus. You can also apply this to multiplication, division, and modulo arithmetic. So here, my number equals my number times 5 can be expressed as my number asterisk equals 5. Same thing. Scroll down just a tinch. My number equals my number divided by 5 can be expressed as, drum roll please, my number slash equals 5. Same thing. Finally, my number equals my number mod or modulo 5 can be expressed as my number percentage sign equals 5. All of these statements, the ones in the comments and the ones preceding them, are equivalent, and it will save you plenty of time in the future. Next, we will talk about the increment and decrement operators. We will wipe our slate clean real quick. My number equals my number plus 1. Now, with what we just learned, we could also express that as my number plus equals 1. But how about something to save even more time? Sound good? Alright. How about this? My number plus plus. I know. Mind blown. I understand. Now, a little tidbit of fact. You've probably heard of the programming language C++. The programming language it was based off of was called C. Why do you think it's called C++? Because it's the next iteration of C. Here we have the increment operator. We are iterating the number by 1. We are adding 1 to the number. We can do the same thing with subtraction. My number equals my number minus 1. Again, we can make an equivalent statement with what we just learned. My number minus equals 1. Or, again, we can use what's called the decrement operator. My number minus minus. I know. Pretty cool. Now, there are slight differences in how increment and decrement operators can be used. And it's called prefix and postfix. Is it before the operation or after the operation? Now, you will notice that increment and decrement operators will often be included within other statements. So you will see it in a for loop when we talk next week about more control structures. But the plus plus or minus minus can be placed before or after the variable. If they are placed after the variable, it's called a postfix increment or decrement operator, which means it is evaluated after the rest of the statement the variable is a part of is evaluated. If it's before the number, it's a prefix increment or decrement operator, which means the increment or decrement operation is performed before the other operations in the statement. So I will give a little bit of an example here. Console.WriteLine my number. Console.WriteLine my number, and we're going to use a prefix operation. So here's what we're going to see. You're going to see the number 5 on the screen in the first line, and then the number 4. Why? Well, first, we are writing my number to the console. Next, before we write my number to the console in this line, we are decrementing my number. So we're doing my number minus 1 before we write to the console. So you will see the number 5 and then the number 4. Ready? It would help if I showed you the contents of the console window. Let's try this again. Alright, as you see on the screen, the number 5 and then the number 4. Now, that was a prefix decrement operator. Now we are going to turn this decrement operator into a postfix operator, so after the operation. So here you're going to see the number 5 and then the number 5 again. Why? In the first line, we are writing my number to the console. In the second line, first we write my number to the console, and after the statement is completed, we decrement my number by 1. So you will see a 5 and a 5. As you can see, a 5 and a 5. Now, to prove that I am not crazy, let's write my number to the screen again without performing any operations on it the third time. So you will see a 5, and a 4. Because by the third time we write to the console, my number has been decreased by 1. And there There you go. Now we can do the same thing with the increment operator. So if we use a prefix increment operator, so plus my number, first we write my number, which is 5, to the console, the first line. In the second line, the very first thing is done is my number is incremented by 1. Then we write to the console. So you're going to see a 5 and then a 6. We will run this, and you see a 5 and a 6. Now if we want to turn this into a postfix increment operator, we add the plus signs at the end. So just like we did before, we're going to see a 5 and a 5. Run this again. We see 5 and 5. To prove that we're not crazy, we show my number for the third time, and you will see my number shown as 5 first, then another 5, and then a 6, because the postfix operator in the second right line adds 1 to the number after it is written to the console, which means the third time we display my number, it will show it incremented by 1 equaling 6. We will run this again, and as we expected, we see a 5, and a 6.